Okay, imagine this. Think about two absolute extremes of human emotion. On one hand, you've got passionate, romantic love, right? The kind poets write about, the stuff that, launches the thousand ships.
Right, that all-consuming devotion.
Exactly. And on the other hand, you have pure, burning hatred, the kind that fuels wars, tears down societies. We instinctively think these are polar opposites, living light years apart in our minds.
That's the natural assumption, yeah. Love on one side, hate on the other. Complete opposites.
But what if science, actual brain science, proved they're practically neighbors, living right next door in your neural circuitry?
It's one of those findings that really makes you stop and think. It's a genuine psychological paradox. The idea that the machinery for devotion and the machinery for destruction are so closely linked, it changes how we have to look at both obsession and conflict.
It really does.
Yeah.
For anyone who follows pop culture, it's almost like finding out in the Marvel Universe that Thanos and Captain America have basically the same origin story, that the brain mechanism for total self-sacrifice is structurally almost identical to the one for total annihilation.
That's a great way to put it, actually. That fundamental intensity, that drive, it seems to tap into some very similar neural resources, regardless of the ultimate goal.
So today, we're doing the ultimate deep dive. We're going into the evolutionary history, the psychology, the actual wiring in the brain, a whole blueprint of hate.
And the key thing is we're trying to move beyond just saying hate is bad, we know it's destructive. The real question is, why do we have this capacity? How did it get there?
Exactly. We're looking at the science. Could this ancient mechanism have actually been, believe it or not, an evolutionary superpower for our survival way back when? And if so, how is it misfiring so badly in our modern world?
That leads us to the central dilemma, doesn't it? If hate, or at least the capacity for intense intergroup hostility, was genuinely selected for, if it helped our ancestors make it through, how on earth do we override that? How do you switch off a system that's potentially hundreds of thousands of years old?
That's the mission for today. Let's figure this out.
No.
Okay, let's start where the science really gets concrete inside the brain. What does hate actually look like neurologically?
Well, the first thing that jumps out from the research, particularly neuroimaging studies, is that hate isn't just, being really, really angry. It's not just intense dislike dialed up to 11.
Okay, so it's its own distinct thing, like a separate flavor of emotion.
Precisely. Yeah. It appears to be a specialized and often very durable emotional response, and it has its own measurable, unique footprint in the brain. Scientists have actually identified what they call a specific hate circuit.
A hate circuit. Wow, so it's not just borrowing bits and pieces from the anger system or the fear system.
Well, those systems are definitely involved, particularly regions linked to aggression and threat perception. But the overall pattern of activation when someone is experiencing intense hatred is distinct.
Okay, so take us on the tour. If we could light up this hate circuit, what parts of the brain are we talking about? What are they doing?
The key players that consistently show up in these studies include the medial frontal gyrus, the frontal pole, parts of the premotor cortex, which suggest planning of actions, and the bilateral medial insula.
Okay, planning actions.
Yeah.
That already sounds different from just feeling angry.
Exactly. But the two regions that make this research really, really fascinating, especially when we think about how intense and long-lasting hate can be, are the right putamen and the insula.
The putamen and the insula. Okay, what do those normally do? What's their day job in the brain?
So the putamen is really crucial here. It's part of a system called the basal ganglia, which is deeply involved in things like motor control, learning habits, and what we call procedural learning how to do things like riding a bike or playing piano.
Habits and procedures. Huh. So activation there suggests what? That hating someone could become automatic, like a learned habit.
That's exactly what it implies. Its involvement suggests that the behaviors associated with hate, the planning, the ruminating, maybe even preparing actions against the target, can become deeply ingrained, almost like a procedure the brain has learned and can run automatically. It's not just a fleeting feeling, it's becoming part of your behavioral repertoire.
Wow, okay. That right there helps explain why hate can feel so chronic, so hard to shake. If your brain starts treating hating someone like a skill it's practiced. Yeah. That's tough to unlearn.
It really is. And then you have the insula. The insula is fascinating. It processes internal bodily states, what we call interoception, but it's also heavily involved in emotions like disgust, pain, social exclusion, really visceral feelings.
So its role in hate suggests
right.
that it feels physically repulsive.
Yeah.
like a gut-level rejection.
That seems to be it. A kind of visceral, maybe even painful rejection of the person or group being hated. It adds that intense emotional charge, that feeling of, I can't stand them.
Okay, now bring us back to that paradox you mentioned at the start, the love-hate connection. Because this hate circuit, you said, shares some real estate with the love circuit.
This is where it gets wild. That hate circuit shares both the putamen and the insula with the neural circuits activated during passionate romantic love.
Wait, both of them? The habit center and the visceral feelings center.
Both of them. This overlap is, well, it's profound. It might be the neurological key to understanding why both emotions, passionate love and intense hate, can feel so similar in some ways. They can both be all-consuming, obsessive, incredibly enduring, and drive really extreme behaviors.
So when people talk about the thin line between love and hate, there's actually a neurological basis for that. The brain's high-intensity, focused, deeply committed mode uses some of the same plumbing.
It certainly looks that way. Think about those relationships or rivalries that are just incredibly intense, maybe swinging wildly from adoration to wanting destruction. The brain seems wired for that kind of high-stakes, zero-sum emotional state, whether the target is someone you desire or someone you despise.
Okay, so similar wiring for intense focus. What about the threat aspect? Does hate trigger the brain's alarm systems?
Oh, absolutely. We see significant activity in the core threat processing centers. You're talking about the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the periaqueductal gray. This is the system that kicks in our immediate fight or flight response.
The primal survival circuit.
Exactly. And in individuals who are prone to intense anger and hate, this system seems to be, let's say, hyperreactive. It's more easily triggered and maybe harder to turn off.
Like a smoke detector that goes off every time you make toast. It's constantly perceiving threats, maybe even when they aren't really there.
That's a good analogy. And if the amygdala is the smoke detector, then the prefrontal cortex, the front part of the brain, is supposed to be like mission control. It's the regulator.
Right, the part responsible for judgment, planning, impulse control, the executive functions.
Precisely. And what the research shows is that dysfunction, or let's say underactivation in these prefrontal regulatory regions, correlates strongly with poor emotional control and these heightened hateful responses.
So mission control isn't stepping in. It's not calming down the alarm bells from the amygdala.
Or it's not doing it effectively enough. The regulatory system fails to manage the emotional storm, and when that happens, the raw, threat-based, maybe aggressive impulses generated lower down are more likely to dominate behavior. The brakes aren't working properly.
Okay, we've got a map of where hate lives in the brain. But how do psychologists define it? You said it's not just anger. What makes it different, say, from being furious at the guy who cut you off in traffic versus real, deep-seated hatred?
The key difference really comes down to the underlying intention or goal. Psychologically, hate involves much higher emotional arousal than typical anger. There's usually a perception of profound personal or group threat, and critically, there's a much stronger inclination towards attack-oriented behavior.
Attack-oriented. Explain that.
Well, think about anger. Usually the goal of anger, evolutionarily speaking, is to change someone's behavior, right? You yell at your kid to stop doing something dangerous. You get angry at a colleague to make them pull their weight. There's often a corrective element.
Okay, so anger wants to fix something. What does hate want?
Research has called this the emotivational goal. And the emotivational goal of hate, plain and simple, is the elimination or destruction of the target.
Elimination. Wow. Not just change, but removal.
Exactly. And that elimination can be conceived of in different ways. Mental destruction, like ruining someone's reputation. Social destruction, like ostracizing them completely. Or in the extreme, physical destruction. It's not about negotiation or correction. It's about making the target cease to exist, at least in a meaningful way.
That explains the durability we talked about. If the goal is total elimination, the feeling doesn't just go away after an argument. It sticks around until the target is perceived as, well, gone or neutralized. It becomes a persistent sentiment, not just a passing mood.
Absolutely. And another crucial element, almost always present in hate, is a strong moral component. Haters typically feel a sense of moral outrage. They see the target as fundamentally violating ethical principles, maybe even as representing some kind of existential evil or contamination.
So they feel justified in wanting to eliminate the target.
Precisely. This moral justification, often involving what psychologists call dehumanization, seeing the target as less than human, is what gives the brain, in a sense, permission to entertain these extreme destructive goals that would normally be inhibited by social rules or empathy.
That idea of justification connects nicely to the structured model psychologists use. You mentioned Robert Sternberg's model. How does he break down hate?
Right, Sternberg proposed a triangle theory of hate, much like his famous theory of love. He argues hate isn't just one thing, but a compound emotion built from three main ingredients.
Okay, what are they?
First, there's the negation of intimacy. This is basically disgust and repulsion. It's the active rejection of any connection, empathy, or sense of shared humanity with the target. It's like building a psychological wall.
Closing them off, making them other. Got it. What's second?
Second is passion. This is the motivational engine. It's typically expressed as intense anger or fear, or often a volatile mix of both. It's the fire, the energy driving the hatred.
And the third corner of the triangle.
The third is decision commitment. This involves cognitions, thoughts, and judgments. It's characterized by the devaluation and degradation of the target, seeing them only through a lens of profound contempt and making a commitment to diminishing or harming them in the long run.
Negation of intimacy, passion, and commitment to devaluation. Wow. That really paints a picture of a psychological state geared for sustained, purposeful destruction.
It really does. It highlights how complex and multifaceted hate is.
But if it's so destructive, especially now, it brings us back to that central question. Why did we evolve this capacity in the first place? It seems like such a liability. We need to shift gears now, leave the brain scanner, and head way, way back in time. To the savannah, maybe.
Yeah, if we look at the deep history of our species, the evolutionary perspective suggests something really counterintuitive. This capacity for hate, or at least for intense, coordinated intergroup hostility, probably served crucial adaptive functions in our ancestral environments. It likely helped promote the survival and, importantly, the reproduction of our ancestors' small groups.
That's the paradox, isn't it? We're wired to think of hate as purely negative, a moral failing, maybe a psychological sickness. But evolutionary science is suggesting it might have actually been a key part of the survival toolkit for Homo sapiens hundreds of thousands of years ago.
The archaeological record really supports the idea that intergroup conflict goes way back. We're not talking just the last few thousand years. Research, like work coming out of places like the University of Cambridge, points to fossil evidence suggesting organized warfare, or at least lethal intergroup violence, dates back maybe 200,000 years, perhaps even earlier.
200,000 years. Okay, so this isn't some recent invention of civilization or culture. This capacity for group violence is ancient, baked in.
It appears so, and the evolutionary pressure it created must have been immense. Anthropological studies looking at skeletal remains, analyzing population patterns in prehistory, they estimate that the cost of this conflict was staggering.
How staggering.
Some estimates suggest that 20 to 30% of ancestral men died as a direct result of intergroup violence.
20 to 30%. That's not just background noise. That's a massive constant threat. A death rate like that would absolutely shape behavior and psychology over generations. It would favor any trait that helped your group win those conflicts.
Exactly. It acts as a powerful selective filter. And sadly, we see similar patterns, similar high rates of male death due to intergroup conflict, even in some contemporary hunter-gatherer societies that have been studied, like the Yanomamo people in the Amazon basin.
So this pattern of lethal group conflict wasn't just a phase, it's been a recurring decimal in human history.
It seems to have been a persistent feature. And that sustained level of violence would strongly favor the evolution of psychological adaptations for what we call coalitional aggression, the ability for groups, especially male groups, to coordinate effectively for hostile action against rival groups.
Okay, so the ability to team up and fight other teams was a winning strategy. But wait, we also evolved cooperation, empathy, altruism. We know humans are incredibly good at helping each other within the group. How do those two things fit together? The niceness and the nastiness.
That's where the central theory comes in, parochial altruism.
Parochial altruism. Okay, break that down.
The basic idea was actually hinted at by Darwin himself, but it was really formalized much later using mathematical models from evolutionary game theory by economists like Jung-Kyu Choi and Samuel Bowles back in 2007.
Okay, economists modeling ancient hatred. Interesting. What's the core concept?
The core idea is elegantly simple, actually. It suggests that altruism, being selfless towards members of your own group, and hostility towards outgroup members likely co-evolved. They went hand in hand.
Co-evolved, meaning you couldn't get one without the other.
The model suggests that the full benefits of strong internal cooperation and self-sacrifice only really paid off evolutionarily if that cooperation was directed towards competing with or defending against other hostile groups.
So just being nice to your buddies wasn't enough? You also had to be ready and willing to be nasty to the guys over the hill for the whole system to work.
That's the provocative insight, yeah. The modeling shows that groups composed mainly of these parochial altruists, individuals who were highly cooperative internally and highly aggressive externally, would consistently outcompete, displace, or even eliminate groups that lacked that combination. Maybe groups that were just generally nice or groups that were just generally aggressive but couldn't cooperate well internally. The combination was the winning ticket.
Okay, I need to understand the mechanism there.
Yeah.
How does that work? This is where multi-level selection theory comes into play, right?
Yeah.
Selection acting on groups, not just individuals.
Exactly. Multi-level selection or group selection provides the framework. Think about it like this. Within any single group, a purely selfish individual might seem to have an advantage, right? They get the benefits of others' altruism without paying the cost of sacrifice themselves.
Sure, the free rider problem.
Right. But now think about competition between groups. A group composed mostly of altruist individuals willing to risk themselves for the team, share resources, coordinate defense. That group is almost certainly going to defeat a group composed mostly of selfish individuals who are only looking out for number one.
Okay, so the nice guys within the group might lose to the selfish guy, but the group of nice guys beats the group of selfish guys.
Precisely. And because the winning group proliferates, the traits that made it win, in this case parochial altruism, both the niceness inside and the nastiness outside, become more common in the overall population. It makes this seemingly paradoxical combination evolutionarily stable. Group survival trumps individual advantage in this context.
Wow, that's a huge idea. Altruism, our best quality, might have only flourished because it was paired with hostility towards outsiders. It's like finding out the Fellowship of the Ring only succeeded because they secretly hated elves or something.
It is a challenging concept, and importantly, this isn't uniquely human. Studies on chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, show strikingly similar dynamics.
Really? Chips too?
Oh yeah. They display strong in-group favoritism, cooperation within their community, but also engage in coordinated, sometimes lethal aggression against neighboring chimpanzee groups. This suggests these tendencies have very deep phylogenetic roots, predating humans.
So this isn't just culture, it's biology.
The biological predisposition seems very strong, and experimental studies with humans consistently show the same thing. Just introducing an element of intergroup competition, dividing people into arbitrary teams and making them compete reliably increases cooperation within each team and simultaneously hostility between the teams.
Okay, now let's drill down into the specifics, because the sources talk about a difference between the sexes here. There's something called the male warrior hypothesis, or MWH.
Right. The MWH, developed by researchers like Aaron Sell and others, focuses specifically on male adaptations. It argues that because ancestral warfare was primarily fought by coalitions of men against other coalitions of men, this recurrent pattern exerted strong selection pressure specifically on male psychology.
Pressure for what exactly?
For adaptations that made men particularly good at forming alliances, coordinating group action, and effectively engaging in intergroup aggression. Basically, selection favored men who are good team players in the context of violent conflict.
So evolution specifically tweaked male psychology for coalitional combat. What's the evidence for that?
Well, cross-cultural studies consistently find that, on average, men tend to show greater intergroup bias, stronger favoritism for their own group, stronger identification with it, and also report higher motivation for engaging in group-based competition compared to women. This pattern seems pretty robust across different societies.
Now, I have to push back a bit here. That sounds potentially like it could veer into men are just naturally aggressive territory. Is there nuance here? Does the MWH account for female aggression or cultural factors?
Sure. That's a really important point. Good MWH research absolutely acknowledges nuance. It's not saying women aren't capable of aggression or that culture plays no role that would be absurd. The hypothesis is more about the function and typical context of evolved aggression differing between the sexes due to different historical selection pressures.
Okay, so different pressures led to different kinds of aggression being favored.
Exactly. The argument is that for ancestral men, the primary selective pressure related to intergroup conflict favored coordinated, potentially lethal, external aggression against rival males. For ancestral women, the pressure is likely related more to defending themselves and, crucially, their offspring from various threats, including male aggression and perhaps engaging in more indirect forms of competition. The costs and benefits of direct participation in warfare were vastly different for each sex.
That makes sense from a reproductive strategy perspective. What about the biology? Is there hormonal evidence linking male psychology to this kind of coalitional aggression?
This is where it gets really interesting. Neurobiological studies have found that testosterone levels actually correlate positively with in-group cooperation, specifically during intergroup competition.
Hold on. Testosterone correlates with cooperation. I thought testosterone was the aggression hormone.
That's the common understanding, but it seems more complex. In the context of facing an external threat as part of a group, higher testosterone appears linked to increased willingness to cooperate with your own teammates to defeat the rival group. It's not just about individual aggression, it seems to fuel the bending together to fight the enemy response.
So it's less make me fight anyone and more make me fight with my guys against those guys. Like a neurochemical rally the troops signal.
That seems to be a better way to think about it in this context, yeah. It suggests a specific hormonal mechanism underpinning this male coalitional psychology.
And does the MWH also predict different emotional responses to threats between men and women?
It does. Based on those different evolutionary pressures, the prediction is that men, when faced with threats from an outgroup, particularly other males, are more likely to respond with anger and what psychologists call approach-oriented aggression, basically. A readiness to confront, fight, or retaliate.
Okay, fight mode. What about women?
For women, the prediction is a tendency towards more fearful and avoidant responses, especially when facing outgroup threats. This would prioritize risk reduction, escape, and protecting vulnerable offspring, which aligns with maximizing reproductive success under those ancestral conditions.
It's all about minimizing risk versus maximizing gain in different ways. One last piece on the evolutionary side. The sources mention the imbalance of power hypothesis. This suggests the timing of attacks wasn't random.
Right. This hypothesis argues that the kind of lethal coalitional killing that really drives evolution doesn't happen just any time there's hostility. It happens primarily when two conditions meet. First, that general background hostility exists, and second, there's a perceived imbalance of power, sufficient for one group to attack the other with relatively low risk to themselves.
So it's not about brave, fair fights. It's about calculating the odds and attacking when you think you can win easily and safely. Like an ambush.
Exactly. It's calculated, opportunistic violence. The psychological mechanisms seem to favor exploiting situations where you can inflict maximum damage on rivals at minimal cost to your own group. This pattern is seen not just in humans, but in other species that engage in coalitional killing, like chimps and wolves. It's about risk assessment driving the decision to attack.
Okay, so we've built this picture. Our capacity for hate, or at least intense group hostility, isn't just some random glitch. It seems to be a deep-seated, potentially ancient, and once highly effective psychological system that helped our ancestors survive in small competing groups.
Right, it was adaptive then.
But here's the multi-trillion-dollar question. We are not living in small bands of 150 people fighting over hunting grounds anymore. We live in giant, complex, global societies. And this brings us right to the heart of the problem, the concept of evolutionary mismatch.
Evolutionary mismatch is a really crucial concept in modern evolutionary biology and psychology. It basically describes situations where a trait, physical or psychological, that was advantageous in the environment where it evolved becomes maladaptive or even downright harmful because the environment has changed so dramatically.
It's like we've still got the Stone Age software running on spaceship hardware. The programming is completely out of sync with the current operating conditions.
That's a perfect analogy. The old programming doesn't just not work well, it can actually cause catastrophic failures in the new context.
When did this mismatch really start to kick in for human tribal psychology?
The major turning point is generally considered to be the advent of agriculture, starting around 10,000 years ago. That shift from small, mobile hunter-gatherer bands to larger, settled agricultural communities, that's when things really started to change, forcing our ancient psychology into totally new situations. Denser populations, more fixed territories, interaction with far more strangers.
Okay, let's break down the specific mismatches. What's the first big one?
The first huge one is simply scale. Our ancestors lived and evolved in small groups, maybe 30 to 150 people, mostly kin or people they knew intimately their whole lives. Our tribal psychology, our in-group, out-group detectors evolved to work effectively at that scale.
Right, you knew everyone in your us, and them were maybe the small group over the next ridge.
Exactly. But modern societies force this psychology to operate on an unimaginably larger scale. We're asked to apply that intense tribal loyalty and suspicion to massive, abstract categories, nations of millions, political parties, religions, online communities, sports team fandoms.
So our brain, designed to handle maybe 150 us versus 150 them, is now trying to process millions of us versus millions or billions of them based purely on abstract labels.
That's the problem. It vastly amplifies the tribal instinct way beyond its original design parameters. The intensity of feeling designed for immediate local threats gets projected onto huge abstract groups, often people we'll never meet, based purely on ideology or affiliation, not actual direct conflict over resources.
Okay, scale's one mismatch. What's another major one?
The second critical mismatch is the speed differential. Biological evolution works very slowly over millennia. Cultural evolution, especially in the last century or so with mass media, and now exponentially faster with digital technology and social media, it moves at lightning speed.
So our psychology, which evolved at a glacial pace for small-scale, slow-moving conflicts,
Is now trying to cope with instantaneous global communication. 247 news cycles feeding outrage, algorithmically amplified echo chambers, and the potential for conflicts to escalate globally in minutes, not generations. Not to mention the mismatch between Stone Age aggression instincts and modern weapons technology.
we really are, as you said, running Stone Age minds on spaceship hardware, navigating a digital battlefield. It's a recipe for disaster. And you can see how these ancient instincts directly fuel modern problems, like xenophobia, that intense fear or hatred of strangers, of foreigners, of anyone perceived as other.
Absolutely. That basic wariness of strangers, that stranger danger instinct, almost certainly provided a survival advantage in the past. An unfamiliar individual, especially an unknown male, could have represented a genuine threat to your group's safety, resources, or mates. Caution was adaptive.
Is that instinct deeply ingrained? Does it show up early?
It seems to be. Psychologists see evidence of it very early in development. Infants often show anxiety when separated from primary caregivers and left with unfamiliar adults. This suggests deep developmental and likely evolutionary roots for preferring the known in-group and being wary of the unknown out-group.
But in our modern, massive, interconnected world, that ancient stranger danger default setting gets completely distorted, doesn't it?
It gets totally misapplied. The mechanism evolved for assessing immediate local threats gets triggered by superficial differences: skin color, accent, clothing, religious symbols in people who pose absolutely no actual threat to your personal safety or resources in a large, anonymous society. The ancient alarm system is firing based on novelty and difference, not objective danger.
So you might feel that flicker of distrust towards someone just because they look or sound different, even though logically, it's irrational in a city of millions.
Exactly. The instinct overrides the logic because it's so deeply embedded. And the sources also emphasize something important here. Individual personality plays a huge role in how strongly these ancient biases manifest today.
Ah, so it's not uniform. Our individual psychology can moderate the instinct.
Definitely. Research consistently finds that people who score higher on personality traits like empathy, agreeableness, maybe humility, they tend to show significantly lower levels of xenophobia and prejudice. It's like their default setting for the in-group boundary is just naturally wider.
They're better at overriding the us versus them trigger.
It seems so. Conversely, individuals who score higher on traits sometimes called the dark triad, narcissism, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, or on measures of authoritarianism, tend to display much stronger outgroup hostility and prejudice.
So while the ancient programming might be there in all of us to some degree, our individual personality, maybe our upbringing and experiences, acts like a volume control on it.
That's a great way to put it. Personal growth, developing empathy, learning emotional regulation. These things can absolutely act as bliss on that 200,000-year-old instinct. It's not just the ancient hardware, it's the modern personal software we run on top of it that regulates its expression.
Okay, we've covered the deep biological roots and the modern mismatch. But hate doesn't just stay inside one person's head. It spreads. It infects groups. So now we need to talk about how hate propagates, not just through genes over millennia, but through culture, through ideas, almost like a virus.
Exactly. This brings us into the realm of cultural evolution, and specifically the concept of memes, famously introduced by Richard Dawkins.
Right, memes not just as funny inner pictures, but in the original sense. Ideas, beliefs, behaviors, units of culture that spread from person to person.
Precisely. Mimetic theory views these cultural units, memes, as being subject to similar evolutionary principles as genes. They vary, they get selected for, meaning some spread better than others, and they get transmitted or replicated. A successful meme is simply one that's good at getting itself copied.
So from this perspective, intensely hateful ideologies, things like racism, religious extremism, extreme political polarization, these are essentially just very successful, very virulent memes. They're good at spreading.
That's the framework. And you have to ask, what makes them so fit in the mimetic sense? Often, it's their simplicity, their strong emotional charge, and, crucially, their ability to tap into those ancient, pre-existing tribal circuits we've been discussing. They resonate with our evolved psychology.
They push the us versus them button really effectively.
Incredibly effectively. And research looking at the spread of hate speech online shows patterns that really do resemble viral epidemics. Exposure to a certain set of radicalizing ideas can create a kind of mimetic immunity, making people resistant to alternative, more moderate viewpoints. This helps explain the intense ideological polarization you see in echo chambers and radicalized groups. The meme essentially inoculates its host against competing ideas.
And what's pouring gasoline on this mimetic fire?
Without a doubt, the digital age has been the ultimate accelerant. Social media platforms dramatically speed up the transmission of these memes, giving them global reach almost instantly. They create echo chambers where hateful ideas are constantly reinforced.
And you also mentioned context collapse. What's that?
Context collapse is a huge issue online. It's where symbols, phrases, jokes, or even complex ideologies get stripped from their original context and audience and then blasted out to entirely different audiences who interpret them differently, often in the worst possible way.
So a symbol that meant one thing in a small community can suddenly be adopted globally as a hate symbol, completely detached from its origins.
Exactly. It allows symbols and ideas to be easily weaponized and amplified in ways that were impossible before. Culture itself becomes weaponized at the speed of light.
And underlying all this spread, all these viral ideas, is that fundamental human need to belong, right? To be part of a tribe.
That's the engine. The tribal instinct hypothesis, which is strongly supported by research in social identity theory. Hate, especially collective hate, almost always manifests at the intergroup level. And the psychological process often starts with an increase in identification with your own in-group.
So you feel more strongly about being part of us? What triggers that?
Often it's triggered by a perception of being threatened, discriminated against, or rejected by an outgroup. That perceived threat makes people cling more tightly to their in-group identity for safety and validation. This heightened loyalty then often leads, almost automatically, to increased in-group favoritism and its dark twin, out-group derogation, putting down the them to make us feel better or more secure.
It's the classic circle the wagons response. We bond together by identifying and devaluing a common enemy.
Exactly. But there's an important nuance here from the research. While in-group love and out-group hate are clearly related, they seem to operate through somewhat different psychological and even neurological mechanisms. It's entirely possible to have strong, positive feelings and loyalty towards your own group without actively hating or wanting to harm outsiders.
Okay, so they aren't always two sides of the same coin. Loving your group doesn't automatically mean hating others.
Not necessarily. But certain factors act like a bridge, strongly linking the two. Things like believing your group is morally superior, feeling a high degree of threat from outsiders, or constantly engaging in social comparison, where your group's value is defined by being better than the outgroup. Those things tend to activate both strong in-group favoritism and strong out-group hostility.
That sounds like the pathway towards radicalization, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When does strong group identity tip over into dangerous extremism?
Researchers who study radicalization often describe a process involving roughly 3 key stages. It's how someone goes from maybe feeling marginalized to becoming part of a group willing to commit violence.
Okay, walk us through it. Stage 1.
Stage 1 often involves initial identification and seeking validation, frequently following some form of personal or social rejection. Individuals might feel lost, alienated, or that society has wronged them. Extremist groups are masters at finding these individuals and offering them a powerful sense of identity, belonging, purpose, and, crucially, an explanation for their problems, usually blaming an outgroup.
So the group provides the community and answers they were missing, but the price of admission is adopting the group's hatreds.
That's often how it works. Stage 2 is radicalization through group polarization and conformity. Once inside the group's echo chamber, isolated from mainstream views, opinions tend to become more extreme. Through processes like groupthink, social proof, everyone else here believes this, and pressure to conform, moderate views get silenced and the group's hateful ideology solidifies and intensifies. Reality gets filtered through the group's lens.
They become more extreme just by talking to each other, cut off from outside perspectives. What's the final stage?
Stage 3 is the most dangerous. Reconceptualizing violence as virtuous self-defense. This is a critical cognitive shift. The group starts to frame potential violence, hate crimes, terrorism not as aggression but as necessary, morally justified, even heroic acts needed to protect the in-group from a perceived existential threat posed by the out-group.
So they flip the script entirely. They're not the aggressors, they're the defenders,
Yeah,
the heroes.
exactly. They see themselves as soldiers in a righteous war, not as perpetrators of hate. This moral reframing is what psychologically enables individuals to overcome the natural aversion to harming others and engage in extreme violence.
And incredibly, we can actually see traces of this psychological transformation in the language these groups use. Hate speech has specific markers.
Oh, absolutely. Hate speech isn't just random insults. It's a specific linguistic strategy designed to dehumanize and delegitimize a target group. Discourse analysts find characteristic patterns: frequent use of first-person plural, we, us, and second-person you, implicitly meaning the in-group, versus third-person, they, them, to draw sharp moral boundaries.
Us versus them, built right into the grammar.
Right. You also see lots of dehumanizing metaphors comparing the out-group to animals, insects, disease, and often a heavy use of modal verbs expressing certainty and obligation, words like must, will, should, which creates a sense of urgency, shared mission, and leaves no room for doubt or nuance. It's language designed to solidify the in-group and incite action against the out-group.
It really sounds like language itself being used as an evolutionary tool, tapping directly into that ancient parochial altruism blueprint, build cohesion here, attack them over there.
It's a powerful form of social engineering through language, designed for mutual exclusion and conflict.
Wow. Okay, this has been, well, it's been a pretty intense look at the dark side, tracing this instinct from potential evolutionary advantage to modern-day weaponization. But we can't end there. We have to talk about solutions. If hate is rooted so deeply in our evolved psychology and these ancient systems, how do we actually fight it effectively? It seems like just telling people don't hate isn't enough.
That's the critical realization. If these hateful tendencies really do stem from deep, once adaptive psychological mechanisms, then simply relying on moral lecturing or purely rational arguments often falls short. You're essentially trying to argue with a 200,000-year-old survival instinct. It doesn't respond well to logic alone.
So we can't just ignore the instinct or wish it away. We have to acknowledge it's there, but maybe find ways to redirect it. Work with our evolved nature, not directly against it.
That's precisely the most promising strategy emerging from the science. Effective interventions likely need to find ways to redirect those powerful tribal instincts toward more constructive ends. Instead of trying to eliminate the us versus them tendency altogether, which might be impossible, we try to change who counts as us.
Expanding the circle of us.
Exactly. One of the most powerful techniques involves promoting what psychologists call superordinate goals. These are shared goals that are compelling to different groups but require cooperation between them to achieve.
So you create a situation where former enemies have to work together on something bigger than their conflict. Like, I don't know, two rival towns having to cooperate to build a flood barrier that protects both.
That's a classic example. Or think about tackling global challenges like climate change or pandemics. When groups are forced to cooperate towards a common, vital goal, the brain's tribal mechanisms can actually start to recalibrate. The former them starts to become part of a new, larger us, united against the shared problem. You're essentially tricking the ancient circuitry by changing the definition of the team.
Okay, that's a structural approach. What about working on the individual level? What specific psychological skills can we build to counteract hate based on the brain science we discussed?
The research points strongly to two key skills: building empathy and enhancing self-efficacy.
Empathy makes sense, feeling what others feel. How does that counteract hate specifically?
Empathy training focuses on helping people understand the real-world impact of hateful attitudes and actions on victims. It encourages perspective-taking, forcing individuals to see past the dehumanizing labels and recognize the shared humanity and suffering of the target group. This directly challenges the moral justifications and emotional distancing that enable hate.
It bridges that negation of intimacy gap that Sternberg talked about. Okay, what about self-efficacy? That sounds like confidence.
It is, but it's a specific kind of confidence,
Right.
the belief in your own ability to act effectively. Self-efficacy training gives people concrete skills and the confidence to actually intervene when they witness hate speech, prejudice, or discrimination. Instead of being a passive bystander, frozen by uncertainty or group pressure, they feel empowered to speak up or act.
So it turns bystanders into upstanders. Are there actual programs that do this successfully?
Yes, there are. For example, the Hateless program is cited as showing documented success in increasing adolescents' skills and confidence in recognizing and responding effectively to hate speech, precisely by targeting empathy and self-efficacy.
That's encouraging. Beyond those behavioral skills, what about targeting the brain directly? You mentioned the prefrontal cortex, the mission control, being weak sometimes. Can we strengthen that?
That's another key area. Emotional regulation training aims to do just that. Techniques often drawn from cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, or mindfulness practices can help individuals become more aware of their emotional triggers, manage aggressive impulses, and engage their prefrontal cortex more effectively to make more thoughtful, less reactive responses to perceived threats or polarizing information.
It's like upgrading the brain's braking system.
Essentially, yes. Building a better internal circuit breaker to handle those ancient surges of tribal emotion.
Now, for any of this to be truly scientific, we need to be able to measure progress. We can't just rely on hoping people feel less hateful. You mentioned hate is quantifiable. How do researchers actually measure something so complex?
It's definitely measurable, though it requires sophisticated tools. Researchers don't just ask, how hateful are you? They use carefully designed and validated psychological scales that break hate down into different components.
Like what? Give us an example.
One widely used tool is the Hate Behavior Scale, or HBS. It doesn't just measure feelings, it measures the propensity for specific negative behaviors towards an outgroup. It has subscales looking at things like willingness to discriminate, likelihood of engaging in defensive violence, reacting aggressively to perceived threats, and even belligerent violence, which is more about premeditated offensive aggression.
That distinction between defensive and belligerent violence seems really important, especially thinking about that radicalization stage where people see themselves as defenders.
It is crucial for understanding the underlying mindset. And for an even deeper, more comprehensive picture, there is the Abuelitish Hatred Scale, the AHS. This is a longer scale, around 35 items.
35 questions about hate. What does it cover?
It's very thorough. It assesses physical symptoms people associate with intense hate, levels of deep mistrust and intolerance, feelings of in-group superiority, and, critically, the desire for retribution or revenge against the outgroup. Using scales like the HBS and AHS allows researchers to quantify changes over time and rigorously evaluate whether interventions are actually working.
So we're not just fumbling in the dark. We have the brain map, we understand the deep evolutionary history, we see how it spreads culturally, and we actually have validated tools to measure it and track the impact of interventions designed to reduce it. Hashtag DAG outro.
Exactly. So if we try to synthesize this entire, sometimes difficult, deep dive, I think we land on 3 really crucial takeaways.
Okay, let's hear them. Takeaway number 1, the brain. Hate isn't just super anger, it's a distinct, measurable, and often incredibly durable emotional state.
Yeah.
And maybe the most startling thing is that it shares critical neurological real estate, specifically in the putamen and insula, with passionate, romantic love. It's like love's dark twin, wired for obsession in a similar way.
Right. Takeaway number 2, the past. Our capacity for this intense, group-focused emotion likely emerged from ancient psychological mechanisms, that core idea of parochial altruism. It was probably adaptive, helping small groups survive brutal intergroup competition, but always at a terrible cost. Now, that same system is profoundly mismatched with our huge, abstract, fast-paced modern world, causing it to misfire constantly and catastrophically.
And takeaway number 3, the solution. Because hate has these deep roots, simply telling people not to hate isn't enough. Effective solutions need to be smarter, science-informed. They need to work with our evolved nature by redirecting tribal instincts, expanding the definition of us through superordinate goals, and by actively building psychological skills like empathy, self-efficacy, and strengthening that prefrontal cortex regulation.
And that brings us to the final big picture thought. A question, really, to leave you, the listener, thinking about. We know the human brain evolved these powerful competing capacities, one for incredible in-group cooperation, the other for intense out-group competition. And we know that the environment, the culture, the situation largely determines which of those tendencies dominates.
So the final question is,
If that's true, What specific conscious changes could we make to our environment? What cultural shifts could we engineer right now, today? What kind of world would select for our capacity for widespread kindness and cooperation and against our deeply inherited instinct for tribal hostility and destruction? How do we deliberately shape the environment to favor our better angels?
That is a profoundly challenging question. How do we consciously evolve our culture to override our deepest, sometimes darkest instincts? Something to really chew on. Until next time, keep digging deeper.